Apple's moving. And why is the thing on me? Mark.
Is everybody here?
I think so.
All right. If we're ready, okay, all right. Well, good evening, everyone. This is Mayor Tim Scott. I'd like to call this May workshop meeting to order. And our first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So if you'll please rise and we will do the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America, to the republic which stands
One nation,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
justice for all.
All right, thank you, everyone. The next item is citizens to be heard, affordable housing initiative, and I believe Dr. Jill Bartoli is with us for this presentation. Dr. Bartoli, the floor is yours. Jill, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay, so a group of us have been trying to think of, I don't know, kind of out of the box ways of looking at how could we possibly get more affordable housing for families who desperately need it. And kudos to all of you who just magnificently opened the community center for 50 people that needed homes. I'm going to push a button right here. I think it says start my video. Is that the right one? Oh, there it is. Yeah, so thank you, all of you, for making it possible for 50 people to be staying at the community center. That's fabulous. And thinking ahead toward where do they go and where do the families go who are in motels along with dozens of other families during this crisis, and where do we go from here, and how can we make it possible for citizens to work together with property owners and individual property owners to make spaces that might be affordable housing. So that's why we're here. And so Jerry is going to be telling you a little bit about ideas that he has for us all to be working together in ways that we might be able to get more affordable housing for families. And then Mike will be able to tell you from his own experience of looking into some of the zoning and the coding and barriers to getting things like garage apartments or mother-in-law apartments together. And then we wanted to ask your ideas, whatever suggestions you would have. Just brainstorm a little bit with you about where do we go from here and trying to make it more simplified, more easy to be able to create more spaces for families in our town. Because there's going to be a flood of homelessness after all of this, not even thinking about, all of the evictions that may be happening. So I'm going to turn over to Mike, and then Mike will turn over to I'm going to turn over to Jerry, I'm sorry, and then to Mike, and then Sherwood will be joining us to brainstorm with you for a few minutes. So thank you for having us. Jerry should be here. There he is. Jerry is not here. Sorry, Susan, do you know? Is Jerry tuned in?
I don't see him on here, Jill, but Mike is here. You want to
Okay.
just go to Mike?
Mike, we're going to skip right to you.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. The reason that I'm involved is my issue of simplification. It's something that Mike Skelly and I've talked about in the past. And what we're looking for is a way to make the processes easier to complete either additional housing or new housing or any of the projects within the borough limits. And I don't know, did everyone get a copy of the little project I sent out?
Yeah.
Did anyone have the opportunity to even try to look into that?
Mike did. He sent something to help us a little bit, but I don't know if we answered all the questions.
Okay, well, the idea is simplification in my mind, and I would think the borough would want that as well. It can be done. I've brought that up with Mike, and he said, yes, he can handle it. He could simplify a lot of these issues, but he has to be authorized to do that. And I guess that's what I'm here for, is asking, council to allow staff to make everyone's life easier, if that is something council's willing to do.
Mhm.
And I
So-
can give you examples if you would wish, if you would like.
I think it would be helpful if you could kind of run through the scenario for us and anyone else listening, so people could have a better understanding of what a scenario is and what roadblocks.
Well, I'll give you one if I can, right now, just because it's something I was working on. I literally have to call into staff and waste their time because I wanted a variance to put in a garage apartment behind a property. And the form is called the Board of Appeals form. That's the name of the form. Well, you tell me how, I'm a fairly logical person, how I'd be looking under the Board of Appeals form for a variance or some kind of zoning use. It just doesn't make sense. It could be simplified. The form's very complicated, and I've looked at some of these forms before, and it's still difficult. So that's just one example. But in downtown central business district, it's zoned for commercial. Apartments are a variance, even though half of the downtown is apartments on second, third, fourth floor of these buildings. Why? Why do I have to go before the zoning hearing board in the downtown to put in an apartment? Does that really make any sense?
Mike, can you jump in? How much of this is under our control and how much of this is what the state requires to be in our zoning ordinances?
I think this is all within your control, Tim, honestly.
I was actually talking to Mike Skelly. I was actually talking to Mike Skelly, but that's okay.
Sorry, Tim.
That's all right. Just want to get a staff perspective.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So with regards to what you mentioned in terms of state regulations, there really isn't any in our zoning ordinance with regards to, let's say, tonight's, I guess, discussion is framed around affordable housing. But a secondary element, which Mike Adler brings up, is more secondary dwelling units. So in that case, Mike Adler is correct. It varies by zone, whether it's allowed or not. And then it's a matter as to, is it allowed by right? In Mr. Adler's case, what he is pursuing for the June zoning hearing board for his application is that the C1 zone requires him to go to the zoning hearing board for approval, subject to satisfying, I think there's like 5 or 6 criteria. So assuming he can adhere to that, then he should be good. And then the zoning hearing board would grant him the approval.
So I guess the process becomes, more burdensome than I think it has to be. And I don't think it's to anybody's benefit to be this way.
I just want to get a staff perspective.
Good evening, everyone. So with regards to what you mentioned in terms of state regulations, there really isn't any in our zoning ordinance with regards to, let's say, tonight's, I guess, discussion is framed around affordable housing. But a secondary element, which Mike Adler brings up, is more secondary dwelling units. So in that case, Mike Adler is correct. It varies by zone, whether it's allowed or not. And then it's is it allowed by right? In Mr. Adler's case, when he is
That was interesting. We heard from Mike Skelly twice. I have no idea why that happened. Okay, this is the first for me. All right, we're learning here as we go. All right. So Mike, just to summarize, Mike Adler, just to summarize, you would seek a more streamlined process, and we can clean up the process through revising our zoning ordinance.
I believe, and documentation. Your forms and things, I think, are very outdated. It's just because no one has probably had the time to update them. And a lot of those things would make everyone's life easier, staff's life easier, people who want to fix up properties in the downtown. It could all be made more simple. And I think Mike is very capable of doing it if he's permitted to do so.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with looking at our processes and cleaning them up and seeing how things can be streamlined to make it easier for folks that want to develop property in the borough. I have no problem with that. Does anybody have any questions? We'll just start with Deb Fulham-Winston. Anything? You'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Just unmuted. No, I like the idea of streamlining those processes. I'm a huge fan of trying to increase our density in logical ways that don't have a negative effect on the neighborhood. But, you know, adding the equivalent of, is it ADUs, additional dwelling units, makes perfect sense to me, especially in this time of where we need more affordable housing. So yeah, I think we should be looking at the processes.
All right, thank you. Deputy Mayor, anything?
Yeah, I think I agree with Councilor Fulham-Winston. I think it's something worth looking into, and you know, and as much as possible to mitigate the downside, any of the downside to it, but making a simpler process and allowing more and denser use of some of our residential areas that make sense.
All right, thank you. Councilor Stubbe.
Yeah, I mean, I just echo the sentiments already made. I don't see any issue with looking into this further and seeing what we can do to update any zoning ordinances that are out of date, any forms that are out of date, and kind of streamline this process, make it more efficient for everyone.
All right, Councilor Landis.
Yeah, I'm actually very happy that this is on our discussion tonight. It's something that I've read a lot about over the years and, you know, kind of brought up not directly, but, you know, when it comes to different discussions we've had over the years. I really like the idea of accessory dwelling units, which for anyone in the public that doesn't fully understand, I mean, a lot of times it's a conversion of a garage or some, you know, where it's a single family home that maybe, you know, an additional small residence could be on the same plot. Again, with the density and, you know, diversifying school districts, things like that, like where sometimes it's harder to get some affordable spaces for families to live in different neighborhoods. I think that that's incredibly helpful. I do see that Jerry is now on, and I did have some conversation with Jerry beforehand, just so he gave me some information as well, and the stuff that Mike Skelly has coordinated for us to read. I mean, I think that's all very helpful. And a couple other things, although we're talking about affordable housing today, and I think I just want to talk about for just a moment that a lot of times when people think affordable housing, I think of large complexes, but that doesn't mean that it has to be affordable housing in the traditional sense. It's just someone that can afford to live someplace. And so thinking creatively about how we can provide different types of housing within the borough. And it's not always a giant complex. I'm actually looking out my window at the Tire and Wheel site, and there's some lovely houses that are coming up, and they are affordable housing, but that's not always the scenario. But aside from it just being affordable housing, I mean, like, I do like to advocate for the concept of ADUs and just creatively thinking about zoning, because especially right now we have a economic crisis going on, and these can be small scale conversions that can, again, you know, give money back into construction and development, and instead of it always expecting a large scale. And it can give a small, bit of money back into a homeowner's pocket by becoming just a small scale landlord that has one residence on their own property, which again, those tend to be people that really care about that property because it's literally in their backyard or right next door. So I think there's many layers to it that maybe haven't completely come out in this discussion yet, but I think there's lots of things for us to consider and weigh. And I'm very happy that this has been brought forth. And I do hope that we entertain it and really look at how we can, evaluate what barriers we have to this right now. So,
All right, all good points. Thank you. Councillor Hicks.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of things. I would be curious to know, once we start feeling a little bit more confident, what the new demand might be, or what we're learning in terms of new housing as we evolve through the crisis. That will help me understand maybe a little bit more on the urgency about how fast we need to maybe move in looking at some of these rezoning and ordinance changes. But in general, I'm supportive of the idea of making it as streamlined as it possible to do something like this. We need to probably keep this idea running in parallel with the other landlord ordinance, because we potentially going to have a whole new set of landlords, and they're going to have maybe some interest they didn't have before. But those are my only thoughts.
All right, thank you very much. And Councillor Crampsey, bring us home.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I apologize, I'm having terrible technology issues. But just I agree with what everyone said. I think anything that can make this process more streamlined, easier for the residents and easier for staff. And then I think the concept overall is great as well. I think, Councillor Landis hit it out of the park. It just, it's a huge community benefit. And the things that we're talking about, I think, are super important to start, exploring that. And I think, including stakeholders that we hear from tonight, as well as staff, will be important. But I think it's definitely something that we should move forward on and try to get something done.
Thank you very much. And as Jill said, Mr. Eby, Jerry Eby is here. I guess, Mr. Eby, would you like to be recognized to share some thoughts? You may have to unmute.
Technology is wonderful when it works.
Can
I
Owen
know,
unmute
I
him?
know.
Or can Owen unmute him directly, maybe?
I don't know.
Maybe.
Susan?
Am I not communicating, or?
There you are. There you are.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Please proceed.
I'm sorry. I'm technically challenged also.
Join the club.
I've been on the school board for quite a while, and it came to my attention here a year or two ago. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but we have a fair number of children in the school district that are homeless. And it struck me that's hard to believe. How does a child do his homework, and how can he concentrate in classwork during the day if he doesn't know where he's going to live tonight? He's sleeping on a church floor or in somebody's car, or just, that's just too much uncertainty for a young child or boy or girl to be saddled with, and it really interferes with their education, as you might imagine. It's a concept I just couldn't wrap my head around for a while, and it took a long time. So I've gotten involved with Jill and Sherwood and Mike, Jim Burgess, who is a retired principal from our school district, and starting to talk to them about how do we overcome this. And then last fall, the borough took notice with all the people on the sidewalk, and some of them are homeless, and what do you do to help those folks? And we've just started to work on the idea of how can we help people that are homeless. And my idea is, or at least something we come to realize, that a lot of times these folks need a mentor to help them through the system, and to use all the different organizations in Carlisle Borough that are that are here to help people. I'm on the board of the Employment Skills Center, and there's just lots of people who are working in lots of different organizations to help folks that are needed. And we've been working on the idea of establishing a mentor to work directly with that homeless person or a person having a problem with having a place to live, and help them go through the system and get the needs that they have. We all, particularly in government and been around the community for a while, we have lots of contacts that we can help these people with, introduce them to a service that they need and follow them until they get into that system and be able to use it. And so basically it's a mentor to, what our parents did to us. We didn't have these issues because you had a mother and father that were helping you get through this system and learn how to be adult. Many of these people maybe don't even have that history to work from, that somebody taught them how they're supposed to live, and how can they be a tenant, and how can they be a mother and father, and helping their children in the school district. It's quite a big issue, and I think we can all help that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jerry. And thank you for your service on our school board as well. I think that staff has their direction, unless there's some other clarifications that staff might need. I think you've got the green light, Mike Skelly.
Tim, could I make one more comment, please? Mike Adler.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Mike.
I wanted to respond to Mr. Hicks because he had a very legitimate question. I think his point was he was trying to wrap his head around the idea of the homelessness and also the growth and the need for housing. And I'll give you, these are big round numbers, but, obviously we're in a census year, and they've been talking about the census figures that are projected. And right now, Cumberland County is somewhere in the 225 to 235 range in population. Cumberland County's projections for 2040, which is 20 years away, is 280,000 people. So where are we going to put 45 or 55,000 additional people if we don't get ahead of this thing? I think we're going to have a mess on our hands. I think we need to be very proactive at this point in time, because we can't just keep building up farm fields and putting in residential developments. It's not going to work. I mean, you take a 100-acre farm and build, say, 300 houses, so you've covered 600 to 900 people. Well, we're talking about 45 to 55,000 people. And I think that, that was really eye-opening to me, and I hope that answered Mr. Hicks' question a little bit, just that we've got to get a grip on this thing before it hits us, and then we've got people everywhere and we don't have anywhere to put them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. And I see Sherwood McGinnis has joined us. Sherwood, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think it's been the details here have come across pretty well. I agree with Mike that we have a need for housing. And I think we need to, this is going to be a big issue, not only here in Carlisle, but nationwide. And the big concerns that we face are really what type of workforce, how are you going to attract people? How are you going to take care of people? And housing is the number one thing that a family needs. They need to be able to have that security, to go home, to do all of those things. And we need that. That should be our number one priority, I think. And so I'm very glad to hear that we're going to look at options, get rid of some regulations if they don't make any sense. But keep in mind that our goal should be housing for everyone, affordable housing where a family can grow up, kids can go to school, and they can feel safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherwood. I can definitely say that this council shares your goals, and we are excited to dig into this. So unless there's anything else, I'd like to thank all of you, Dr. Bartoli, Sherwood, Mike Adler, Mr. Eby. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention, and we will get back with you soon.
I'm going to put one last thing in just because
Absolutely.
sometimes it's something, especially when we talk about rentals and we talk about tenants and landlords and everything. You know, I understand that, you know, a lot of times communities are looked at what's the home ownership, what's the rental, but right now, especially, it's going to keep going towards rentals, and that's exactly the way it has been. So providing good quality rentals where people are safe and comfortable, that's how people end up planting roots to then become owners in the future. And so I don't ever want people to diminish the fact that renters are, you know, just here for a little bit, because honestly, a lot of those folks end up staying here for good because they see this as a beautiful community. And so I want to stress that this is part of that process. I mean, I used to rent too, and now I planted my roots. So I want to diminish that notion that it's homeowners and it's renters. No, we are all one community and we need to support each other.
Well said, Brenda. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We understand if you want to leave, but you can certainly stick around if you want to. We'll move on to our next agenda item, meeting minutes. I move that council approve the March 4th, 2020 workshop meeting minutes.
So moved.
It is moved by me and seconded by Brenda Landis.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next up, item number 4, budget and finance.
And I can kick that off, and then we can have some input from staff. This was part of Act 15 of 2020. It was the General Assembly's reaction to the COVID-19 epidemic. Part of Act 15 permits taxing jurisdictions like the borough to do a couple of things. One is to extend the period of discount out until the end of August. And we talked about this a bit before. And the other is to basically extend the face value period out until the end of the year. So if you know how you pay your real estate taxes, there's a discount period, and then there's face value, and then there's a penalty period. So the idea behind it was to give some form of tax relief as people are working their way through unemployment and the economic struggles that we are all in the midst of. The complication with that, of course, is especially at this time of year, you have 2 taxing jurisdictions going out on the bills. So we have the municipal tax, the borough tax, real estate tax, and then you have the county real estate tax. So what would occur if the municipality and the county were not on the same page is a lot of confusion and trouble for tax collectors, which our staff is one of the tax collectors in the county since home rule. The confusion among the taxpayers too could occur. You could imagine a situation where the county has adopted some form of the discount, and the borough has adopted another form of the discount. So in an effort to try to avoid that sort of confusion, the county reached out to the tax collectors, which of course included borough staff, for input on that to try to get some consensus. I'm not sure what the results of their survey may have been, but it did result in a resolution from the commissioners. And I was trying to pull it up here. I don't have the details of exactly what they did, but instead of doing the full discount, the full extension of the discount period, they did a partial extension of the discount period, and then chose not to extend that face value period to the end of the year. They would leave that as is. And before I spat off I'm seeing head nods, so I think I'm right so far. But before I spout off any incorrect details, I'll pass it off to Richard. I think would that be most appropriate? Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, just to clarify, they extended the face is what they changed. They changed the face to go through October 31st, and then to begin assessing a penalty of 10% on November 1st. And they didn't choose to change their discount period.
Thanks for the correction. Yeah.
So yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. The county made that decision. Should Borough follow suit, that would be the most efficient for staff, but also lead to less confusion. But if they chose to waver away from that, we do have the capabilities in our software to accept such a change, but it would create some confusion for certain. Just to give you just a quick background of where we are today, our discount is where we collect the majority of our funds. We're still tallying that, but the confirmed numbers to date, we're up at about 4.3 million collected. Last year we were at 4.5. So we're about $200,000 short, but we're still counting individual payments that come in through the mail that were mailed before April 30th. So we, I think we're getting pretty close to our normal collection, and uncollected at this point is 700,000. So that being said, if you were to change anything, if you were to extend the discount, the borough would see a revenue loss unanticipated of about 15,000, worst case scenario. And if you were to extend the penalty, the revenue loss would be about 13,000, and that's just based on what was collected previously in prior years.
Okay. I just for the sake of uniformity, as much as I probably would have leaned toward extending both, I think it's going to be simpler for taxpayers and for the borough staff to mirror what the county did. So, but that's open for discussion, obviously.
If I could just add one more quick item. If you were to extend the discount, the challenge would be on the borough. We'd be issuing refunds. If you chose to waiver from the county on the penalty, we would end up putting the burden on the taxpayer because we can't accept partial payments. So those are the two issues that would come up should we waiver.
Okay.
I would like to just vote for whatever is going to be most consistent so it's most understandable by the average taxpayer, so they're not being confused by differing deadlines. It just seems like that just adds confusion that we don't need.
Thank you, Deb. Does anybody feel differently? Brenda, Joel, Jeff, Sean? Okay.
All right, then we can have the resolution in front of us next week to marry up to the counties.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anything else, Deputy Mayor?
That concludes my report.
All right, wonderful. Moving on to community planning and smart growth, Councilor Crampsey.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two items tonight. The first item I'm going to hand off over to Deputy Mayor Schultz as well as Councilor Hicks. We have a climate change resolution discussion.
And I'll quickly kick this over to Councilor Hicks. Just a reminder, this is a part of a process that we started last year in preparing greenhouse gas inventory. What Councilor Hicks has done is taken the bull by the horns and has crafted a resolution to one, help us establish some long-term goals in our efforts to mitigate climate change, and also to start to create a framework for a committee that would work in more detail toward those goals. I'll note a couple of things in the resolution. It uses a 2005 benchmark for baseline for greenhouse gases. We have been able to project get data to project back to that 2005 where we would have been at that point. The good news is that mostly due to efficiencies in electric generation, we have reduced our emissions by about 17%. So we're a long way there. I've jokingly said that after the reaction that we've had to have due to COVID-19, we're probably the rest of the way to our goal at this point. But we're not going to stay here, and we don't want to stay here under these circumstances. But it also one kind of shows that we can potentially get there. I think there are estimates that nationwide there's been an 8% reduction in greenhouse gas emission during these last couple months. And two, it also shows, what a hill we have to climb yet to get where we need to be. So with that, I'll pass it off to Councilor Hicks to provide some more detail and background, and I know there are others who will want to chime in.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I wanted to go through sort of piece by piece on the resolution, and just I'm going to particularly focus on the areas that we are looking to resolve. There's some background that you can read, but I want to sort of bring you up to speed about, in case you have questions about where our targets come from and how they mesh with Pennsylvania and nationally, and outline some efforts that other municipalities and states have done who have similar types of plans, where they've gone to sort of navigate those changes. And I do want to emphasize that anything I bring up here is not anything I'm recommending potentially for Carlisle, but it's just some strategies that other cities and states have taken in actually meeting their targets. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. And hopefully everybody can see that. All right, great. So I will say I went through some of these slides with our manager, and Susan thought that this would be helpful just to kind of give staff and the public some background about where the specifics of our resolution would be coming from. So I think most of you probably know back in January of 2019, Governor Wolf put out an executive order outlining some goals for Pennsylvania, and you can see them there on the screen. 26% reductions by 2025, 80% reductions by 2050. Where do those come from? They actually are derived from the only actual federal commitments that we have on record, and despite some claims that we're going to withdraw from those nationally determined commitments, INDCs, they are actually still our federal targets, and Pennsylvania embraced those. And these are the targets that I have and others who helped craft the resolution would propose that we mirror what Pennsylvania has done. Some of you might ask where the 2005 reference comes from, and it really is nothing more than the fact that those were our highest emission levels, and that we were going to, when the first international commitment, which actually predated Paris, it was actually a China-US bilateral agreement that the Obama administration agreed to right before the Paris Accord, but it established 2005 for the US because those were our highest levels. I will add, since the UNFCCC, which we are a party to, they've referenced their levels relative to 1990. So the advancements we make relative to 2005 have to be understood that those are still quite a bit higher than 1990, but they are our federal and our national commitments. So I would encourage those to look at the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan. It's pretty in depth, it has a lot of great information. The Commonwealth actually did a 2016 greenhouse gas inventory and assessed the Commonwealth to be at 19% of 2005 levels. Last month, we got a brief from Dickinson College, who has been a partner with the borough in assessing our own inventory, which we did, the most recent one being 2017. And like the deputy mayor said, we were able to make a quantitative comparison to 2005, and we assessed us to be about 17%. So you can see we're actually not that far different right now from where Pennsylvania is as a state. So I've just broken up the state and borough emissions to on the left and the right there. The only thing I wanted to kind of highlight was the fact that we sort of incorporated, the state sort of broke electricity production out completely on its own and didn't integrate it with residential, commercial, and industrial. And in our case, we sort of integrated that with each of those subsections. So that's why there's a little bit of a difference in trying to interpret those percentages. But what I really wanted to convince you all is that we're really not that different in terms of those relative percentages. I mean, if you look at transportation, that's probably where we're a little bit noticeably higher than the state on average, but I don't think anybody here would be terribly surprised to see that transportation has a little bit higher footprint here. We are fairly reflective in the relative percentages of what Pennsylvania is finding on a whole. So I pulled out the actual parts of the resolution that would we would need to strategize about. And again, these are only my comments, but the targets we would agree to would be, again, consistent with our current targets. And again, we're at about 17% as of 2017 toward getting to our closest target would be 2025 at 26%. I think it's important that we probably will understand these targets either from a state or federal level may be moving as we get. I will say, as sort of someone who works in this area, but I mean the targets that we have at the 26% by 2025 and 80% 2050, they really kind of establish a floor. They should not be interpreted as aspirational in achieving the international goals of staying within below 2 degrees centigrade of global surface temperatures. So we should view them as sort of the minimum bar to help us achieve what most scientists and climatologists believe we need to do. And again, that's assuming everybody complies with those reductions. So I included a clause that just says, if the state or federal government makes another commitment, that we would reflect those. But we have one that we can quantify, but we should probably stay flexible in case those targets do change in the future. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if they do. As the deputy mayor said, we've been working sort of with the framework that DEP has recommended for municipalities. One of those activities, which I think makes a lot of sense is that we would want to form a climate action committee to look at some different approaches. You know, we saw a whole host of sectors that we could navigate to reach our targets. We want to understand better, you know, how we measure these things. That would probably influence the sorts of things that we would recommend. But basically leave it to a committee to look at different strategies over the next several months to meet those goals. And then we would want to, you know, have a nice cross section. I think making up that committee, bringing in folks from within the community itself, businesses, probably some council and staff representatives, those from the academic community. Again, these are, we have some evidence from other towns and municipalities and boroughs in Pennsylvania that have seen like anywhere between 6 and 15 people they've used to sort of navigate a committee. Obviously, that's something we could decide what works best for us, but that's a general sort of boundary for what this committee would probably need to consist of. I mean, it's a balance between having enough expertise and not having too many people where it's unwieldy that you can't come to a consensus. So that would be something we'd want to look more at. And as I discussed briefly with some on staff, you know, people working more maybe in the transportation, building maintenance, and zoning areas would be good candidates for participation on staff. And so the idea would be that we would empower a committee to come back with a recommendation of and to interact with the public on these alternative pathways, and that they would, after a period of time, notionally a year. Again, I think that could be, we can entertain some different ideas of how long that would take, but I think not having an actual report back date is fraught with not coming to a resolution, but making it too soon would maybe not give it the import and due diligence that I think achieving these targets and really coming up with a strategic and enduring way of looking at carbon emissions, we want to probably think about somewhere in the order of a year. And so this is in no particular order of things that would probably make sense to look at in terms of developing alternative strategies. And I might just highlight that the bottom thing more than anything is as we kind of get more familiar and smarter about what approaches are the most cost effective and actually more effective. You know, I think a lot of what we need to do is be a sounding board and be an educator for the residents so that they have the tools they need as well. So for instance, you know, the power switch option for residents, you know, who might be motivated to purchase renewables on the wholesale markets. You know, that actually is a pretty seamless process. A lot of folks don't know about that option, and you know, educating on energy efficiency and maintenance, helping people work through sort of the decision-making calculus when it comes to making energy efficiency decisions. And I think that will hold for the public sector as well in terms of our decisions and that we make in terms of maintenance. Certainly engagement with utilities as the deputy mayor indicated. I mean, the primary progress we've made to date, quite frankly, comes down to a few words: natural gas replacing coal as a primary source of generation. You know, the degree to which that's happened going into the future is a bit unknown. And so there is a level of engagement with utilities where we decide to get our generation from that we actually can control, and we need to educate ourselves on what our options could be. Lots of towns have looked at who may have, you know, some places that have struggled to actually be to meet carbon reduction targets, and so they make carbon neutral decisions, and they do that by buying offsets, by saying, hey, you know, I can't necessarily make those carbon reductions within our boundaries, but we will support carbon offsets that reduce carbon footprints outside of their jurisdiction. That's a strategy that some cities and municipalities have taken. It's been tree plantings, but things like zoning and standards for new construction. There's even cities that have put restrictions on the types of water heaters, trying to go more to electrification. You know, as the electric grid gets more carbon free, it starts to make sense to move sort of hot water heaters from gas to electric in some areas. And then you can read these transportation. I think you know, there's a lot of reason to believe that we're going to have a big uptick in the next 10 years or so to more fuel efficient plug-in hybrid vehicles or electric, you know, completely electric vehicles. We need, you know, maybe we should think about the infrastructure it takes to support those options. But it's also, you know, things we do every day in our meetings is think about how we're encouraging public transit, carpooling, walking, and biking. Those all have real effects in particular our transportation carbon footprint. Solid waste and wastewater is usually a pretty big significant contribution on the public sector inventory. If you looked at a little closer, you know, when we look broadly on the entire borough, it's a pretty small section. So I don't think solid waste and wastewater will have a major strategic impact in changing the way we do business, but in some areas it has a lot bigger sort of carbon footprint. So that was what I wanted to share with everybody, and be happy to kind of answer any questions. And I also want to thank Councilor Stubbe for some of his, he made some very nice editorial and making the resolution read a lot better than my hand scribble. So big shout out to him. So anyway, those are all the formal comments I had. Thank you everyone for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you both for your work on this. I think, you know, at least I'll speak for myself. This is super exciting. And I know there's been a lot of effort and thought put behind the path we want to go. Are there any questions from council?
I don't really have necessarily a question. I think it's more of just trying to get our head around something that seems so large. I think that, you know, some of the things, some of the, you know, options that could be implemented that Councillor Hicks noted are things that we don't have, you know, a full plan for yet. But just like we have a comprehensive plan that as things come up for us to vote on, we say, does this match our comprehensive plan? I think that this is something that if we can create a guiding document that we're like, does this align with our goals and how can those things be tweaked? So I think especially when we're talking to the public, anyone listening, you know, and it seems like such a huge thing. It's more of like how we choose to have some guiding documents and how we make those just part of our daily process in what we discuss. And if something seems like it doesn't really align, like how can we better it, or do we, send it back for a review? So I think that when people don't fully understand how we process the work that we do, we have other guiding documents, and I think that that's something to keep in perspective. And a lot of the things that are in the comprehensive plan actually align with what some of the possible options are that Councillor Hicks also noted. So it's not outside of the realm of what we already do. It's mostly just sort of trying to figure out some metrics and some numbers and some ways that we could do better. So I applaud the work. So thank you.
Just one thing, I also applaud the work. It seems like a great direction for us to be going in. As we start to look at the nature of the folks who would make up that committee, also perhaps trying to recruit somebody from the War College, because of the fact that the federal government does have a commitment to also lowering greenhouse gas emissions, they might bring another perspective.
Those are great points. And I just had a quick question for Councillor Hicks, because this is great work. Do you envision that committee being a working committee outside of obviously creating the plan and presenting that to us, but also I think to Councillor Landis's point, do you see their scope as also being able to look at how that plan would mesh with our zoning ordinance, with our other planning documents? Because I think that is an important point. The more we can make those kind of cohesive, I think the better. So we're not going through a bunch of different things, or they could have a great idea in the climate action plan, and if it conflicts with our zoning, it would be better to have those recommendations up first instead of us, trying to navigate that later down the road.
Yeah, as you might imagine, towns and cities and towns, they can take very different approaches to this. Some of them have them as subcommittees under a planning commission. Some of them have it as a sort of standalone committees. I guess one thing we might want to consider is, is this a standing or a permanent sort of committee, and maybe the status of that committee changes after we have a climate action plan we approve on, and that maybe it can fall under the planning commission after it gets established. My just knee-jerk to your query was that I think it would probably just make more sense to leave it as sort of a standalone to begin with, and sort of be given the direction to interact with any of the staff and planning committees to coordinate as necessary to get the information that they needed. But that's sort of my first thought in terms of how we would form it.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions from council? Going once, going twice.
Councillor Clancy,
Yes.
if I may,
Yeah,
I believe you have several Dickinson students that are in attendance for the workshop. The climate change resolution is a good segue into some of the work that they've done, and it's been forwarded to council with respect to a statement on transportation justice. I didn't know if you wanted them to speak now or later, but I thought this might be a good segue for them.
I think, Mrs. Manager, that's a great point. Yeah, if the Dickinson students are on the Zoom, if we can unmute them, or if they could raise their hand, I think now would be a great time to hear from them. Or maybe they left us.
No, we have them on. We have Anna.
Oh, no.
Oh, cool. Great.
Sorry, I couldn't hear anyone for a minute. Thank you so
I'm
much.
here too.
Yes, Esper is here as well.
Thank you so much, Susan Armstrong. I really appreciate it.
You're
all right. So
the floor is yours. So if you want to go ahead and provide an overview to Borough Council and the public on the work that you've done over the course of your semester.
Yeah, thank you so much to all the council members who have worked so hard in putting this resolution together. It's really, really exciting to see a lot of the things that we're learning about in classes happening in our local government, and just makes me really proud to be connected to Carlisle and to know that all of you are doing such good work. If you had a chance to read what we'd written, thank you so much. If not, that's okay too. It'll always be there for you. And I think it's really important to think about transit and transportation in terms of what Councillor Hicks had created with this wonderful resolution and the charts that he showed about the emissions, but also in terms of thinking about the communities and the conversation that we had earlier about housing, and thinking about how people can be supported to live lives that they can enjoy and like be healthy and safe in Carlisle with housing. But transportation is another big way that that can happen as well.
Spar, maybe you could, since as counselors we did get your document, but anyone watching from the public did not. So if you could give like a little overview of what that document maybe had, I think that would be helpful for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. Let's do it together.
Awesome. Yeah. So basically what we were looking at this semester is something building off of projects we were doing last semester and talking about transportation needs in the Carlisle community and what was lacking for people in terms of their ability to access resources they needed in their community and out of their community. And what emerged is a lot of discussion about diverse forms of transportation and how those are supported in Carlisle. And so we took that opportunity to learn a little more about how transportation planning happens and what's kind of left behind within that process. And using the climate action plan as an area where Carlisle can advocate for the needs of its community members and taking that conversation a step further.
Yeah, totally. And just kind of to reiterate in what we'd written, we really think that transportation is so connected to climate action planning kind of as a moral and ethical imperative, just because the mobility that people have inevitably influences all of the resources they're able to access, the social networks they exist in, the ways they feel safe, and the spaces they have to navigate to meet their daily needs. And transit and public transit and diverse transportation methods, like Anna had mentioned, is a really important way that that can go hand in hand with building a livable future for everyone, so that folks can get around in a world that can support them, but also in communities that they can be more and more connected to via the ways they navigate them.
I can't agree more. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo something that their comments really need to weigh into our development of a climate action plan. And anecdotally, I always look back at the example of a very effective federal acid rain program to reduce sulfur dioxide, which was one of our most successful federal air quality programs. And it was objectively very, very successful, but it did have a negative side effect of concentrating a lot of harmful pollutants in smaller areas. And as more studies show, they tended to be areas of lower income and minority areas. And ultimately, as that sort of became recognized, they had to make changes to the program. That's only to say that, as we're doing things to benefit all, we need to be very conscious that we look at the secondary effects of our policies. And that's why I was glad that Espoir and Anna sort of reached out and reminded us that that needs to be part of our thinking.
Awesome. Any more thoughts or comments? Anna and Espoir, thank you for that. That was great. And I think you all and Dickinson College are also great partners in this process. All right. Anything else on that item? All right. Moving on, my second item is a mitigation agreement for a home project. This is an action item, so I'll make a motion that Borough Council may ratify the standard mitigation measures and agreement by and between the Borough of Carlisle and Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office pursuant to stipulation 8A1 of the programmatic agreement regarding HUD-funded projects and associated with the borough's DCED Home Investment Partnerships Program, grant award, contract number C000069523. Said grant is for the purpose of the acquisition and demolition of 157 and 159 East South Street, Carlisle, to address blight and to construct 2 affordable housing units for low to moderate income eligible first-time homebuyers. Approval would be retroactive to April 25th, 2020, the date of execution.
Mr. Crampsey's made a motion to approve a mitigation agreement for our latest home project. Do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Stube. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Mayor. That ends my report.
Great. Moving on to public safety. In order to comply with social distancing, Farmers on the Square has expanded their operation and the use of sidewalks at South Hanover and East High and South Hanover and West High, all with the blessing of the county. Under current policy, Borough Council has the authority to close streets and sidewalks temporarily for events. That being said, I move that council authorize the closure of the patio of First Presbyterian Church located at 2 North Hanover Street, Dickinson Avenue from North Hanover Street to North Courthouse Street, sidewalks along North Hanover Street from High Street to Dickinson Avenue and Mulberry Avenue, East High Street from Hanover to Irvine Row and Market House Avenue, South Hanover Street from High Street to Church Avenue and Liberty Avenue, and West High Street from Hanover Street to North Courthouse Avenue on Wednesdays from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. beginning May 7th, 2020 through December 30, 2020 for the Farmers Market on the Square, sponsored by DCA. Approval is contingent upon a valid certificate of liability insurance form naming the Borough of Carlisle as an additional insured and DCA reimbursing the borough for 10% of the fixed costs and 100% of the variable costs. I so move.
I second.
Scott.
Thank
Mayor,
you.
Mayor
Yes.
Scott, my apologies. There needs to be a correction on that particular subject. I don't believe that the DCA incurs any costs with this particular event.
Okay.
So I think that with this contingency, we can take that verbiage off.
All right.
It's just contingent upon a valid certificate of liability insurance form.
Okay, great. I will modify that motion to reflect those comments. Mr. Hicks, do you accept my modification?
I do, and I second your original
Thank you.
movement.
Thank you very much. Motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. And that ends my report. And we will go into mayor's report and staff for a COVID-19 update. Madam Manager.
Certainly, Mayor Scott. And I didn't know if you wanted to touch on it, would prefer that I do. I thought that we would start with an update from our emergency management coordinator, Jeff Snyder. and then lead into some of the forums that Carlisle Borough staff and counselors have been engaged in since the COVID-19 pandemic has hit our area, March timeframe until present, and will continue for quite some time. And then I can touch on some of the operations and programming changes as well.
Okay.
So,
after the chief's update, I'll start off talking about the forums and collaboratives that we've been involved in. Just hit the highlights.
okay, sounds good. Chief Snyder?
Yes, ma'am.
You
Good
wanna take-
evening.
Good evening.
So the latest updates from basically the emergency management side of the house is basically for the last 14 days, things have been somewhat quiet with very few requests of needs. Currently, between the fire department, police department, and EMS, there's currently no unmet needs. Call volume is down for all agencies, although the fire department had a 2-alarm fire yesterday on West North Street, but minor in detail, but a lot of work inside. Current PPE is sufficient for all those organizations. I have additional face masks due this week and hand sanitizer arrived today, which was distributed to the fire department, the police, and office staff. Cumberland Goodwill EMS, as Carlisle Fire and Rescue and United Fire Company, or Union Fire Company, excuse me, are facing some financial loss of revenue, especially with Cumberland Goodwill, with call volume being down, and the volunteer fire departments due to canceling some of their huge fundraisers. Their projected losses to the end of July are around $120,000. Now, Cumberland Goodwill, EMS, and Carlisle Fire and Rescue both secured small business loans for paycheck protection. Cumberland Goodwill in the sum of $500,000. Carlisle Rescue for $50,000. Their loan runs for 8 weeks. Probably the biggest effect for the emergency agencies is the effect on training. All local educational training agencies, such as your community colleges, the State Fire Academy, and Health Federation, have shut down all their hands-on type of programs. Harrisburg Area Community College is hoping to staff up next week their Municipal Police Academy, their Career Fire Academy, and EMT training. So that's had an effect basically for generating new EMTs into the EMS world and new volunteers that have been put on hold to start to get some of their basic training. Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency on Tuesday held their first WebEx pertaining to the FEMA grant reimbursement process, and staff attended that to pretty much hear the outline and required forms that will possibly be needed when we file for reimbursement. Any questions from council? Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Chief. In the same vein as what Chief was talking about as far as updates and who we're working with, I get a lot of questions about what the borough is doing in response to COVID-19 response, recovery. And so I asked the manager's office to put together a short list of groups that staff attends, council members attend, things that we're a part of that address those big picture issues. First of all, starting with a COVID-19 collaborative forum that was created to discuss post-recovery strategies and funding for businesses and nonprofits. This is facilitated by Tim Whalen, and participants include Borough Manager Susan Armstrong, the Executive Director of the Partnership for Better Health, the Redevelopment Authority, West Shore Chamber of Commerce, Cumberland Area Economic Development Corporation, Carlisle United Way, the Carlisle Chamber, and the Shippensburg Area Chamber of Commerce. It also includes Kirk Stoner of the Cumberland County Planning Office. Also, you've probably heard about this in the news, the Carlisle Area Emergency Response or CARE Committee, created to address and fund emerging health-related needs within the community. The borough is joined with United Way to identify a line of discretionary funding that could be quickly dispatched to the most critical needs created by COVID-19. Participants are comprised of public members, private individuals, military, academic, and faith communities. The Small Business Committee group, formed in early March, it's a collaborative effort that focuses on small business support during COVID-19 and post-recovery strategies. This group is facilitated by the Carlisle Chamber and Downtown Carlisle Association. Participants include the Borough Manager, South Middleton Township Manager, Robin Bertner, who's our Small Business Administration or SBA rep, CADIC Director Jamie Keeter, Representative Barb Gleim, representatives from Senator Toomey, Congressman Perry, Catherine Wallen, and Bruce McCallahan from Senator Regan's office. The Community Action Network, this group was formed in March by Dickinson President Ensign following a discussion with yours truly and council on responding to public health crisis and needs within our community, especially individuals experiencing homelessness and CARES challenges. It's a big group, 90+ community leaders, and one of the very first initiatives, which you may have heard something about, that was undertaken by the borough and the CARES is the transition of the Stewart Community Center into a temporary shelter for Carlisle CARES. And finally, there are some other initiatives that staff and council are working on, and they include seeking grant opportunities to help fund our local government costs and expenses incurred as a result of COVID-19, reaching out to financial management firms on creative funding solutions for our TIF, engaging with KSA on grant writing, especially for the FEMA grant, and working with the Redevelopment Authority to flesh out our 2020 Community Development Block Grants, CARES stimulus, and Section 108 potential funding sources. So that's just a short list, and I would ask that this list that I read be put on our social media so that citizens can access this and see what we're doing. And one final thing before we move on, I was contacted by former Mayor Bill Cronenberg, and he informs me that the Sigma Chi fraternity, Dickinson College chapter, is donating lunch to all of our first responders on Friday, May 8th. And this will include 25 police officers and 30 EMS and firefighters. I'm not sure what's for lunch, but I understand it's going to be a big delivery of hachi dogs. So once again, thank you to Sigma Chi for stepping up, and just shows once again, average citizens stepping up to help our first responders and recognizing their importance in being on the front line of this pandemic. Susan?
Yes, sir. Thank you. As the mayor touched on, a number of the initiatives that we're involved in at the borough level with, local level with private, public, faith community, business community, etc. You can tell that our focus, our primary focus and concern is for our businesses, our citizens, the borough organization itself, and the ability for us to not only respond to immediate needs, but we also have to look into the future and what does recovery look like post COVID-19. So again, I think that I applaud all the efforts of our stakeholders. We're coming together, and I think just what the mayor touched on there is just a sample of the initiatives that are currently underway. And, that's one thing that I'll give Carlisle again. We all tend to hook arms and find solutions to the problems. So a lot of good people at the table. With respect to the borough organization itself, we, at the very initially in March, in response to COVID, we put a number of precautionary measures in place within the organization structure itself. Have some staff working off-site, staff armed with the appropriate PPE, and we changed some scheduling in order, again, to try to isolate any incident of potential COVID within the organization. And to date, we've done a fine job of that. We have, as you're well aware, we've begun offering online and over the phone purchases of trash bags. That seems to be a service that the residents very much are appreciative of, and continues to be popular. We've waived terminations and late fees on all utility bills from March 28th and into the foreseeable future. We have had a suspension on residential parking enforcement and metered parking for quite some time now. We've extended our spring brush collection from 1 week to 2 in order to provide residents the opportunity, if they're staying home and they're working in their yards, that they just have to place their items curbside, and we'll gladly pick it up if they don't want to visit the compost site. Again, we continue to have discussion and ongoing dialogue with CARES Executive Director Beth Kemp. We're going to review their tenancy around the week of March 18th, and everything is just very fluid right now, as you can imagine. We are not in need of the Stewart Community Center right now. I think a lot will depend on when Secretary Levine and Governor Wolf's orders get modified as such that may provide the borough the opportunity to advance some of the programming, summer programming, and that's when we'll likely have to have a conversation on how do we transition CARES from that facility elsewhere. I do know that Beth and her team continue to look for other facilities that either temporary or permanent. So if anyone knows of anything, please feel free to reach out to them directly. But they're very much appreciative of the facility. And I think it's come in it's been beneficial to them. Town Hall, of course, has been closed to the public, as well as our off-site facilities, with the exception of the police department lobby remains open for individuals until, I believe it's 11 p.m. Is that correct, Chief Landis? I'm not sure if he's on. I think it's 11. And again, programming with Parks and Rec, we continue to just look at that. There will be a decision that will have to be made soon on the community pool and some other programming for the summer. And with that being said, I think that's the highlights for the organization right now.
You are correct, ma'am, that it's open till 11. It just took me much time to find the unmute button.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief. And thank you, Susan, for that report.
Can I chime in before we move on to the next thing, though?
Sure.
So I had one thing, but I'm not going to do that one thing. I'm going to do something else. So it was sort of supposed to be coupled together, so I feel like I still have my little moment. And I also have the square behind me, which was strategic because I love this place. It's like the community's living room, and we can make use of it, as we just did on the last vote, in giving the farmers on the square a lovely larger amount of space. And so when we want to, we can use our public spaces to the best of the community good. And I think we need to be nimble and quick on our feet when we have the power within our organization. So the sidewalks are available, partnering with the square is actually owned by the county, but working with them and thinking about between now and, I know that technically I was supposed to talk about this during our goals maybe in June, but between now and then, hopefully Pennsylvania opens up. And in between now and then, ways that we can be creative and work with our restaurants specifically to allow for more public space, because I mean, I was looking at Florida and I think their number is 25% capacity of what it comparatively had been. So if businesses are only allowed to have 25% possibly of what it normally is for social distancing, outside is a whole lot more space. So all I'm saying is that there's still more work that we can be doing, and within our borough powers, I want us to think creatively and as things open up, not wait to support our local businesses. I mean, we're doing the best we can right now, but as we have new opportunities as a borough with our zoning, you know, there's opportunities for expanding into parking space, not parking spaces on the road, that's PennDOT, but parking lots and sidewalks and other places. So just being supportive. So I'll get off my soapbox. But that's it. Anyway, go to the square and eat your lunch there, socially distanced.
I like your soapbox, Brenda, don't worry. And my final item, to accommodate potential storage of recycled books at the Public Works Garage, we could potentially enter into an agreement with Bosler Library to do so. We have similar agreements with the Downtown Carlisle Association and the Carlisle Special Fire Police. So that being said, I move the council ratify a memorandum of understanding by and between Bosler Library, located at 158 West High Street, Carlisle, and the Borough of Carlisle for the purpose of providing storage space for recycled books at the borough's Public Works Garage, located at 7 Garland Drive. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Councilor Deb Fulham Winston. Any discussion?
Great partnership.
It is. It is. I enjoy work. We all enjoy working with them.
Yep.
Unless there's anything further, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. Thank you. And that ends my report. And now on to Public Works.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have 3 action items for tonight. The first is related to street restoration and ordinance amendment. And I asked Borough Council to authorize the Borough Solicitor to draft and advertise an ordinance amending Chapter 223 of the Code of the Borough of Carlisle with respect to the requirements for restoration of streets in the borough after a utility cut is made within the street.
Councilor Fulham Winston makes a motion involving a street restoration ordinance. And to be on the safe side, since this is an ordinance, I'll call for a roll call vote on this. But first, do we have a second? Sorry.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Landis. Any further discussion? Hearing none.
I have a Mr. Mayor. What would be the timeline we think we would have a draft ordinance ready? I mean, is this something we're ready to go, or would this be something that would take a few weeks or months?
I can't.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I can't speak for the solicitor, but staff has an outline for him to work on, so I would expect that he be ready to go for the minimum amount of time.
Okay.
Minimum amount of time.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Any further discussion or questions for staff on this? All right, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mayor Scott, I do have a question. It's to draft and advertise for the ordinance.
Okay.
So I think we can just vote on that, and then the next time.
That's right. It's a regular voice vote. Okay,
Correct.
no worries.
Okay.
Thank you. That's
Thank
why
you.
we have everybody here, because I don't know everything. All right,
Okay.
I will just simply call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries, and that ends. Oh no.
No, not
Back
yet.
to you,
We've got
Deb.
2 more. We're
Back
almost
to
there.
you. Back to you.
Our second action item is related to the Veterans Apartments land development, financial security reduction. I asked Borough Council to authorize the reduction of financial security posted by Pearl Developers LLC for the Veterans Apartments land development project in the amount of $320,094, subject to the developer first posting a new bond for $120,736 to cover the cost of the remaining public improvements.
Thank you. Councilor Fulham Winston makes a motion for a land development financial security reduction. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Landis. Any further discussion on this?
Just really quick, they look really good. I don't know if you like, I can look out my window and actually see them right now, like literally, like they look good. If you haven't been by lately, you should, because they're putting up some nice little balconies and some stonework, and I don't know, just a little, you know, sometimes we vote on lots of things not knowing what they're going to look like, but swing by. It's kind of
Well
impressive.
said.
I see them on my way, taking the bike over to Southside Deli.
There you go. So I
Welcome
encourage everyone to go over.
Southside
And, yeah, I encourage everyone to go over and take a look. Anything else? All right, we'll go ahead and call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
And my last action item relates to the Latort Interceptor Rehabilitation Project. I asked Borough Council to approve compensating change order number 3 to adjust the estimated quantities included in the contract bid and work change directive to equal the actual quantity of work completed on the Latort Interceptor Rehabilitation project, decreasing the total contract price by $357,966.45.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion on this matter?
I do have a comment. This seems unprecedented. How often does this happen?
Probably never.
Not often. Every once in a while. Every once in a while, something just takes less time.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, Susan, is this something that deserves a thank you from us, or is this just sort of not?
They're doing their job.
Okay, all right. I've been involved in a lot of projects, and I don't know if any of them have come in at this below, but that's great. This is good news.
Yeah, it is very good news, which is in short supply. Okay, if there's nothing further, I'll go ahead and call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
And that completes my report.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess we're at the end of the meeting now. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. And I want to thank the public for joining us, and to all the presenters too. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all back here again next Thursday at 7 p.m. for our monthly meeting. Thank you all. Have a good night. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.